My name is Fode Yusufu Kamara, and I am from Chinley Independent Chapel in High Peak, Derbyshire. My connection with this is starting training on the course a few years ago, whilst I was a church member at Lee Street Congregational Church. Originally, I come from Sierra Leone, West Africa. I was born into a Muslim home, and my journey of faith took a significant change when I lost my dad and I went to live with my uncle, who was a Christian, and that is when I started exploring with the Christian faith. My uncle's influence initially didn't quite stick out with me, knowing exactly what was happening, because he allowed me to continue practicing Islam. But it suddenly changed when he introduced me to a youth group in the church. I then really started exploring. So 2 years later, I became a Christian. Being uprooted from where I was born into at the age of only 8 years old to live at a different place in the same country but a different place, a different culture, a different family, it was a difficult feeling, and I really struggled with that for many years. But I'm happy I was exposed to this experience. Now the foundation course was a stepping board for me in starting a real great journey, theological journey. It became the springboard for me to ask more questions, for me to find out more what I wanted to do. But also, the question that came to my mind was, why am I here in the congregational training course, the only African student in a majority white setting? Then what we were talking about, I was so passionate about it, and I feel I belong to it as much as everybody else, although I was different. So how did I get here, and what am I doing here? And it's these sort of questions that just kept pushing me and to just explore more with theology and say, what am I doing with this? Where do I want to go? And the more answers I got, the more questions that came along, yes, and the theological studies helped me to understand this. I struggled with my identity, but I thought I was coping with that, I could cope with that. But it suddenly occurred to me that it's not just my problem, it's a problem for my whole family. When one day my son, at the age of 7, 8, he came home and asked what his identity was. I can work this out, because my son could legitimately say he's British, but he could also say he's a Sierra Leonean because his dad comes from Sierra Leone. And he's entitled to that. And also, thirdly, he could say he's Danish because his mother comes from Denmark. But then there's the question of, what does he say then? Is he Sierra Leonean? Is he British? Is he Danish? I didn't know what to say to him. So I told him, you can say whatever you want to say because you're all of these things. And then suddenly it occurred to me, how can he be all of these things? He's got to be comfortable. He's got to work his way out of this and know where he wants to fit. And that is when I draw on my theological education and say, where does theology speak into something like this? If I struggle, my son is going to struggle with this stuff. What are we going to do about it? And the light bulb moment came during my training when I realized that this sort of problem that I've always seen as a problem, an issue of identity, is actually not. In the Bible, Jesus asked his disciples what his identity was. Even Jesus, people struggled to know what his identity was. And then, if that happens to me, I shouldn't see it as a disadvantage, but a good place to be. But the exposure to different cultures means I can now speak to all of these cultures and say things to them, and it should be authentic because I belong to them, although I'm not fully part of them. And that was when I realized that I'm not in a disadvantaged position, but I'm in an ideal position where I can interact with different cultures like Jesus was. Now, I have used the story of Onesimus, and this is one that I've had a lot of thinking and walking with this passage. A very short Bible passage, but for me it's heavily loaded. Onesimus, as we know about this story, is found in prison, a runaway slave. Then in prison he encountered something very special. He met a friend in Paul, and then they worked together and they became like brothers. So he got a brother in prison that he never had before. Then this friend, this brother that is met in Paul, now is advising Onesimus to use his freedom in a different way. He's got his freedom. He's going back. I know Paul says, well, you're not going back as a slave. You are going back as a brother. You're going back as a friend. But the whole question for me is, what did Onesimus say in all of this? Did he want to go back? Is that really what he wanted to use his freedom for? To go back to his master? But then, if that's how, people find themselves in places where they don't want to be, the question is that a bad place to be? Because this is where the issue comes with me. I have moved so much away from my family at the age of 8. There's a big question of what do I do when I come back for holidays to this Muslim family? They sort of see when I come back to say, oh, you've been exposed to Christianity. You don't belong here anymore. But funnily enough, when I go back to live with my uncle, they usually refer to me as the Muslim boy who's just converted to Christianity. So I sort of feel the whole idea of Onesimus, did anybody actually ask him, does he want to go back? What does he want to use his freedom for? Is it bad if he goes back? I've always felt that it's a disadvantage for me going back, either way. But this is the light bulb. This is how I got over that. It's no disadvantage. We can be in places where we don't feel we fit in. But then, as Christians or as people, we can make a difference in all of this and can belong and authentically say, yes, we belong here as well. We can play a role in this. So that's why I'm touched by that story of Onesimus, and I think it's quite a wonderful story depicting about people being, you can call it the wrong places. That's what I called it before my light bulb moment. Now I call it being in the place where God wants you to be. I would say if a Christian gets in a place where they are very comfortable and there's nothing to worry them at all, either about the culture, about community, or about what their role is in that, they should be worried. 3 years ago, I was called to Chinle Independent Chapel. This is a rural community. I have never lived in a rural community. I said to the church at the time, I'm happy to explore this. But I'm not sure it's going to last. So let us look at it for a year. I've got a few things. If I settle in, if my family settle in, if we feel we can actually meaningfully make a difference or have a ministry here, then we can continue this exploration. But again, this whole thing of feeling unsettled, it should be that way. It should be that way. But we must, as Christians, remember that God would use us wherever we are, just like God used Onesimus. My light bulb moment is the feeling that even when we get overwhelmed, whether it's by identity or by any issue in life and we feel we can never get past this, as Christians we should just think that there is that help, there is that love, there is that hope to hold on to, and we should be willing to explore.